First of all, I would like to say a very sincere thank you for spending time with us today. I know that you both are very busy with part 2 of Fantasian. This is not only a wonderful opportunity for Final Fan TV, but you are also a personal hero of us, and we are so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
今日はご参加いただきありがとうございますと。はい。
So I described Fantasian as PlayStation 1 era Final Fantasy exploration with nods to Final Fantasy X's conditional turn-based battle system. But at the same time, Fantasian is uniquely its own in many ways. Much of our audience is the Final Fantasy fandom. So what would your pitch be to them to encourage them to play Fantasian?
そうですね。作るきっかけになったのは、FF6 を当時一緒に作った連中。
I think Fantasian, the inception of the project, really was when I had the chance to play Final Fantasy VI with some of the developers at the time on a live stream broadcast program. So we were playing Final Fantasy VI, and it really reminded me of how much I loved that genre. And on the other hand, part of me felt, well, is there really a point to bringing a very, very classic, very orthodox RPG style game into the game ecosystem in this day and age? But now that I'm nearing the end of my career, I thought, well, I want to make a game that I really love and I could fall in love with. So it's interesting also that you bring up Final Fantasy X and how the game has this Final Fantasy X type of flavor, because one of the game designers, Tsuchida, actually was the person who also worked on Final Fantasy X's battle system. So you really pinpointed that, and I think that's why the Final Fantasy X almost experience was kind of a base for him, and even small things like poison doing so much damage, as well as in part 2 of Fantasian, there are going to be moments where you swap characters in and out. So there is a little bit of some 10 flavors in there, I would say.
Nice, thank you.
So Fantasian released on April 2nd, the 27th anniversary of Final Fantasy VI. Was this coincidental or purposeful?
大体4月の
When we were working with Apple Arcade, we had known that the game was going to release towards the beginning of April, but that was about the extent of what we knew. We had given Apple our final build of the game a few weeks prior, and we knew it was around that time, but we didn't know the actual release date. So when it actually hit the App Store, it's actually one of my team members who said, "Hey, it's available, it's online." And I realized, oh, wow, that's interesting. So it kind of happened after the fact on April 2nd when Final Fantasy VI was also released as well. So it had the same birthday, which is something another one of my team members told me afterwards. And it's interesting because the very inception of this project almost ties back to Final Fantasy VI on a bizarre twist of fate. There's this weird kind of destiny thing at play, I would say.
That's awesome. So Fantasian is so unique that it's the only game that I know that uses handcrafted diorama as explorable environments. I've read in an interview years ago that you build Lego when brainstorming ideas. Was this how the concept of diorama environments came to be?
I don't know if I would say, I mean, I personally like Legos a lot, but I don't know if there was a real direct tie with the two. I think going way back to my childhood, even in kindergarten, I would love playtime, especially when we had clay to play with. I would build things, and every time, even growing up beyond that, I would have these Gundam model kits that I would build and construct. So perhaps the diorama is almost an extension of that kind of model building history that I had as a student, and it finally culminated in this almost completed package and visual expression that you see in Fantasian. But as Final Fantasy VI was sort of the inspiration of Fantasian in a way, I think Final Fantasy VI also took advantage of the, I guess you can call like color bleed or color properties of the NTSC monitors to really create that pixel art type expression and deliver what you see on the screen. So it's a very analog method of visual expression, if you will. And similarly, the dioramas, I feel, are the ultimate pursuit or expression of this analog visual, which is kind of interesting and another tie-in to Final Fantasy VI.
I find your sense of humor to be absolutely wonderful. I remember a few years ago you did a promo video where you went off script. You crumpled up a piece of paper, you shoved it in your mouth, and you began pounding on a keyboard. You even ended that promo as a rapper. It was hilarious. Your stories.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Your stories always balance these serious themes with humor like that. Is this something that players can also expect with Fantasian?
結構ファンタジアンは、はい。まあ、やってもらえばわかると思うんですけど、まあ、ユーモアは結構入れたつもりなんですけど、はい。
Fantasian, of course, I included certain humor into the game. And even as I was writing the script and some of the dialogue, I tried to stay really relaxed and let it just flow through me. So it wasn't a very uptight project by any sense.
The stories you tell always leave a lasting impression on players. What is the core theme or message of Fantasian's story?
世界観的には、
The world setting of Fantasian has to do with this balance of order and chaos and kind of this digital society that we live in, this world. I think similarly, there's a lot of order on the digital side, but a lot of chaos in the analog side of the world that we still occupy and within which we exist. So really depicting that theme of finding the right balance. But in addition, one of the characters, Kina, her name translates to destiny in one of the ancient languages of this particular world and universe. And I feel a lot of times the younger generations don't really know what direction to point themselves into. And this is true of Kina as well, where she wasn't sure what the future had in store for her. So she was discovering herself as long as, and in addition to her own path, and really depicting that journey of hers, I think is a big part of what Fantasian is about. Going back to this very information-based society in which we live, where there's just a wealth of information, almost too much information for any one person to process. I feel a lot of uncertainty for us and even more so the younger generation. So really finding that one thing in which you can believe and follow it, that's another theme that I hope people can take away from Fantasian.
I strongly believe that Fantasian is Apple Arcade's killer app. I've actually seen people go out and purchase an Apple TV or an iPad just to play Fantasian. Is Mistwalker in partnership with Apple, or will there be a chance that Fantasian could make its way to Android devices or even consoles?
まあ、まずは、やっぱ Apple TV とかで大画面とか iPad で遊んでもらった方が、4K 解像度まで対応させて作った、ファンタジアンなので、そういうことしてくれるのはすごく嬉しい。
Well, first and foremost, it is my hope and desire that people will be able to experience this game on perhaps Apple TV or something very, very immersive, because we did develop the game in a way where it can handle up to 4K output resolution, and that's how I would like people to experience it in sort of the Apple Arcade ecosystem. But with regards to porting the game, there are no plans at the time, and part 2 also is being developed exclusively for the Apple Arcade. So I think the new Apple TV was recently announced, and it's pretty economical for, I think it was $129, and you can get a 4K output device. So not that I'm a Apple ambassador by any means, or that they bribed me to say this, but I really think it is a good way to experience the game, and highly recommend it.
Go ahead, Vinny, if you would read the question from our Patreon.
Sure. So this is from our patron Badly Brave. Is there any world, be it a certain Final Fantasy or otherwise, that you've always wished to return to? My personal favorite work of yours has always been Lost Odyssey, and I've always felt like that universe has so much potential to be explored further. Thank you so much for impacting so many of our lives and continuing to pour your heart and soul into such amazing products for us to enjoy.
おー。まあ、毎回
Every time I complete development on a game, I, in a weird way, have to kind of archive everything in that experience from the game and really move on and clear my mind in order to approach and face the next story world characters I'm about to create. So I don't often return to worlds I've created in the past. But if there is one exception to that, I would say it'd have to be the opportunity to work with Akira Toriyama. I'm a huge fan of his work. So if there was the opportunity to expand the universe of Blue Dragon or perhaps Chrono Trigger in any way, I would definitely not say no to that opportunity.
Awesome. I would love to see a Chrono Trigger remake
Yeah.
headed by Mistwalker.
ミストウォーカーが作る解釈する
まあそれはないけど
リメイク。
いやいや、鳥山明の新作。
はい。なるほど、なるほど。Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, but let's just say a completely new world that we develop with Toriyama.
Absolutely.
Perhaps.
Has it made you proud to see the ongoing success of Final Fantasy XIV, seeing Final Fantasy VII modernized in a remake, and Final Fantasy XVI on the horizon, returning to a high fantasy setting?
まあ、誇りっていうか、なんていうのかな、そのファイナルファンタジーっていうその一つのこうタイトルが、いやいや、ここまで
Final Fantasy
他にないじゃないですか。
is a franchise that I don't think any of us back then expected to become this big. And there are probably few franchises that can say they've achieved this level of, I mean, not just success, but really penetration into a lot of people's minds. And take Mario or Zelda, for example, those are probably a few of the exceptions. And I think because of that, you know, the new projects that are based on the Final Fantasy world and history and legacy, in addition to what Kitase is doing for Final Fantasy VII, I just feel very thankful for this miracle in a weird way. And of course, I don't know if it's gratitude per se towards Kitase and his team and what they've done, but it's a little bit overwhelming that I can be credited as this founding father of something that has grown so big. So it's both an honor, and I would draw some of that up to luck as well.
So, what area has your favorite diorama? The one that completely captivates you?
With regards to the dioramas, I probably want to highlight something maybe not necessarily the most amazing or elaborate diorama, but there's this hideout in part 2 along this mountain range, and there's one particular set that comes to mind where it's really the size of your pinky, and there's a flower along this road. When you look at it in context of this massive diorama landscape, it almost looks like some dust fell onto the diorama. But when we take these dioramas and then put them through our pipeline where we have to photograph them and then create 3D models and then take those photos and then reproject them onto the 3D models, it looks gorgeous. This one flower, it stands out, and I couldn't imagine it looking this pretty. So honestly, it was very shocking for me to see what I thought looked like a speck of dust, but then reinterpret it through this pipeline in the context of the game, transform itself into this flower. So I encourage everyone, when you pick up part 2, to definitely be on the lookout for that flower.
That's incredible. Yeah, I will, absolutely.
探します。いい話ですね。
Would you care to share a challenging obstacle that you and the team had to overcome during development?
A few things actually come to mind. The first being just the diorama pipeline in general. I had thought, well, we should be able to somehow take these dioramas and translate that into 3D space and put into the game engine and use it. But this was actually a lot more challenging than I initially thought. To get the 3D models of these, and make sure the characters can collide and interact with the worlds properly, we had to use a very unique 3D scanning pipeline. Traditional 3D scanning methods for objects didn't capture the necessary detail that we needed from these intricately crafted dioramas. So we found a pipeline used by cities where in the cities, they would fly these drones to take hundreds of pictures, and from the pictures, stitch together a 3D model. We didn't fly any drones, but we did take a ton of pictures of these dioramas and put it through the same pipeline to then render out a polygon or 3D model that first gave us these objects we can use and manipulate in 3D space. And another big challenge was the camera transitions. I don't know if you guys had the chance to play Fantasian, but you'll notice when you reach the edge of the screen, how the camera transitions. The very first implementation of switching scenes or switching sets, I thought we were going to have to do some kind of hard cut where it would just switch to the next map and your character would be there. But somehow our director and programmer Nakamura came up with this very innovative solution to move and kind of trick the camera into transitioning or panning between different scenes. And I would go so far as calling this almost an invention level kind of innovation on his part. I know it seems very, very subtle, but that to me really elevated the experience and made the world feel a little bit more seamless. So that was a great improvement to the overall game. And lastly, I can think of one more, is the aiming mechanic with the different spells and skills right now that you see. The very first implementation of this was more of a throwing or flicking motion using the tactile interfaces where you would throw these spheres and that would hit the enemies. But through a lot of playtesting and trial and error, we finally landed on this almost bow and arrow like aiming system that I think is a really good implementation of that mechanic.
What is your fondest memory from the development of Fantasian?
Of course, when each element or piece of this game, a piece of the puzzle comes closer to completion, I really get the sense that we're making forward progress. So each little milestone to me has this very interesting sensation that you've reached a peak, or you've reached this top of the mountain where you could feel this excitement that we're one step closer to finishing this. But if I had to pick one, I would say perhaps the greatest of those moments was when Uematsu-san delivered his fully orchestrated recordings of the soundtrack and uploaded that, and I downloaded it and started listening to it. Of course, he would send samples and demos, perhaps using sound libraries that we had implemented into the game as placeholder, knowing that we would get the orchestrated versions later. But just the drastic difference in the quality of those, and when I listened to the orchestrated studio recorded versions for the first time, it brought me to tears, full disclosure. And I think that sound, that music really elevated the entire experience of the game.
I experienced something similar with each email leading up to this moment.
私も、この瞬間までたどり着くための E メールのやり取りで本当似たような感触、その達成感を味わった。
そういうことね。E メールでね。OK。フルートなくてごめんなさいね。フルートなくてごめんね。
Sorry, I don't have my flute today. I know you wanted that. It's not. I don't have it right now, unfortunately.
That's no problem at all.
大丈夫です、大丈夫です。
This is definitely good enough for sure. Now, speaking of music, I'm actually writing a video essay on what if Final Fantasy, the very first Final Fantasy, was your final fantasy. And one of during my research, one of the things I found was that you're very passionate about music. And you were speaking of how the soundtrack for Fantasian brought you to tears. after, and then the rumor is that this could be your final game. Fantasian could be your final game. Do you think you would just kind of dive into music afterwards, or what's next for Sakaguchi-san?
Music, I think, is definitely more of a hobby for me. A hobby I like really a lot, but I don't think I have that level of talent to make a career path out of music. But whether it's even just performing it, listening to it, or even just audio equipment, I really enjoy those aspects of the senses, just the audio side of that. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But, and with regards to your question about, or rumor about this potentially being my last project, I of course haven't confirmed that by any stretch of the imagination, but if hypothetically this were my last project, I think I've kind of come to terms with being okay with that. I felt I really poured everything I wanted to in this. And, you know, a lot of times when creating something, especially in the entertainment industry, you have to be conscious of, is this what the industry or the marketplace wants right now? But I sort of cast aside that concern of whether or not this game would be accepted into the marketplace and really just made a game that I wanted to make. And you don't often get the chance to do this, because when there's a lot of companies or management or business needs at play, you have to cater your creations a little bit towards what the people want at the time. That's what the entertainment industry is about. So I feel very fortunate to be able to do this, and that's partially why I say if this were my last project to work on, I would be okay with that.
It is an amazing game. I've played most of it. I have not finished it yet, but it is absolutely an amazing game, a great achievement. Well, actually, I would rather just end it without a question, but more of just a sentiment that we all share. That just thank you for creating this franchise. Not even just a franchise of games with Final Fantasy, but just the games with Mistwalker as well. The stories you tell, they impact so many lives. Me and Vinny are two of those people. Your work has impacted our lives, and we just want to say a very heartfelt thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to speak with us. We are honored, and I hope that this interview can be a platform to show Final Fantasy fans that Fantasian is an absolutely phenomenal game, and it is a must play for any Final Fantasy fan. Once again, thank you.
まあちょっと最後はまあ質問じゃなくて、やっぱりすごい心の底からありがとうという気持ちを込めて、まあファイナルファンタジーを生んでくれて、私もヴィンセントも本当にこれがあっていろいろなんか人生の辛いとことか乗り越えられた、本当人生の影響を与えてくれたので、まあお時間作っていただいてありがとうというのと、まあこの気持ちを本当に我々のファイナルファンタジーが大好きなコミュニティに届けて、やっぱファンタジアも絶対やるべきなもうマストでやらなきゃいけないっていうこともちゃんと伝えられるようにしていきたいと思います。
はい。Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys a lot for this.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.